Hello, everyone. Here we are today, starting to talk about Luke 24. And the reason, or one of the big reasons why we do studies of the gospel is to get to the ending of the gospel, which deals with the resurrection. If Jesus dies on the cross, in this case in Luke 23, and we left him dead, the price for our sin would have been paid, and we would have had salvation because, again, it was the death of Jesus that's supposed to bring about the forgiveness of sins, the fulfillment of the old law, and all that goes into it. And the proof of that is the curtain in the temple that gets torn. The other signs that went along with the death of Jesus that you can read about in the Gospel of Matthew, about how the dead broke out of their coffins and were walking among the people, and many people saw them, and all these things that were going on. That happened at the death. So the question, and it's a good question, is that if the death of Jesus was such a big deal, then why should we have the resurrection? And the reason why we have the resurrection is to give us hope, is one reason, to show that Jesus is the conqueror of death, not just someone who survived, not just someone who is going to just crawl out of his tomb still bearing the wounds to the extent that he can't even walk anymore. No, no, no. In order to ensure the confidence, the bravery, the work ethic of the church that was established with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, Jesus needed to be seen as one who conquered death, and being able to come out of the tomb with the marks of his crucifixion on him, but still able to walk and talk, to be seen, to eat, and to exist without soreness, to exist without being handicapped or immobile. He went through the crucifixion, he died, and now he's going along like nothing ever happened. And so he needed to be seen as the conqueror of death, to give us hope, to give us courage. And so this is why the resurrection is so important, because after the resurrection, in this case, the disciples are completely different people. Because remember where we left off. Judas betrays Jesus. He's dead now. Hung himself, committed suicide. Then you have Peter, who denies Jesus 3 times, and after the third one, he goes off and he weeps bitterly. And we don't really see him until the resurrection day. Then you have the 9 other disciples. Make sure I got my math right. 9 other disciples who just scattered that night and didn't want anything else to do with the arrest of Jesus. Only the disciple John, according to the Gospel of John, only John witnesses the actual crucifixion of Jesus. So imagine where the church would be, where that first generation of Christians would be if Jesus did not resurrect. They would have still been scattered. Yeah, we would have forgiveness of sins, but who would have told the message? No one. Who would have shared the story? Who would have spread the gospel? No one, because Jesus would have died, and that would have been it. But since Jesus comes back, giving his followers confidence, hope, they then, all these people, except for Judas, all these people who scattered or denied, we're going to see here that they doubted. All these people who doubted and denied and all this, ran away, they're going to be the foundation of what the church in Acts is going to be, built upon the assurance that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, conquered death, and that there is something better to look forward to than what we have here in this life. And all of this is seen in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's get into it. It says in Luke 24, verse 1, it says, "But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, The men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. One of the great teachings concerning the resurrection is the obviousness of the resurrection. I don't know if that's a word, but it's a word now. The obviousness of the resurrection. The women and the disciples are all surprised that the resurrection took place. Contrariwise, the angels and Jesus are not surprised at all. And we'll see this as we go through what we're talking about today. And if you've never done this, just kind of keep track of how the disciples and the women and all those characters view the resurrection in comparison to the angels, and when Jesus talks to people, how they view the resurrection. And this teaching really comes through of how it was supposed to be obvious. Why? Because Jesus told them before. Now, the stone here, what you have here is that you have the women on the first day of the week going to mourn at Jesus' tomb. They're bringing some more spices. They want to tend to his body. But again, there's this stone that's in the way of the door, of the entryway. And as other gospels have told us, the stone has also been sealed. And there's also guards there. And so there's all these things in the way between the women and the body of Jesus. And again, don't make a mistake about this stone. We're talking about the stone the size of a small car that also has the weight. So, if you look at Mark chapter 16, verse 3, as the women go to the tomb, one of their concerns is, well, who's going to move this stone out of the way so that we can, see, mourn, tend to the body of Jesus? But they don't have to, because the stone has been rolled away because there's nobody there. Now, you have these angels that are there. And again, look at the angels' response. They find the body they don't find the body. They find that the body's not there. And so the angels are there and they're talking to them, and they say, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? And he is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified on the third day rise." Now, this response is broken up into a couple of issues. First of all, why? Why are you seeking the living among the dead? Again, the resurrection should have been obvious. Jesus told them before, which comes to the second part. Remember what he told you. Again, the resurrection should have been obvious. But of course, it's not obvious to them. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But as far as the plan of salvation goes, as far as what Jesus taught them beforehand, yes, the resurrection should have been obvious. Why are you looking for a live person buried in a cemetery? It doesn't make that much sense. He's not here, but he risen. But again, remember what Jesus told you. Well, what did Jesus tell them? He told you while he was still in Galilee. In other words, before they even made the trip to Jerusalem, scattered throughout his ministry, the back half of his ministry particularly, Jesus told them what was going to happen a few times in detail. We're going to Jerusalem. I will be handed over into the hands of sinners. The Jews will hand me over to the Gentiles. I will be ridiculed and flogged and beaten, and I will be crucified, and I will rise on the third day. He told them repeatedly. Now, we also get verses in the Bible, for example, Peter, James, and John at the Mount of Transfiguration, when Jesus tells them, "Don't tell anybody what happened at the Mount of Transfiguration until after I've been resurrected." And they're talking among themselves, wondering what being resurrected means. And so, again, they heard, but they didn't hear, because let's face it, have you ever heard something that's just too good or too incredible to believe? That's what the resurrection was to them. And so, again, to the angels and to Jesus, to God, to all the heavenly bodies, the resurrection was an obvious fact. It was going to happen. But to the human agents involved in this situation, in this time and place, and again, don't think I'm ridiculing anybody. If I was in their sandals, I probably would have been reacting the same way. But to the human agents in this tale, in this account, it wasn't so obvious. But this is what the angel hits them with. Remember what he told you. Now, the women go off and they tell the disciples, but the disciples do not believe what the women are telling them. There were more who doubted besides Thomas. You know, Thomas, the disciple of Jesus, Thomas is one of those guys in the Bible that I really feel sorry for because he gets this bad rap in the Gospel of John. You know, when Jesus appears to the 11, technically to the 10, because Thomas isn't there. When Thomas comes back to the room, they say, "We've seen Jesus," and Thomas, brokenhearted, says, "Unless I put my finger into his wounds and my hand to his side, I will not believe." And ever since then, he's been called Doubting Thomas. But the truth is that if you read the other Gospels, all the disciples doubted. They didn't want to believe. You know, even Peter, you know, God bless Peter, even after he saw Jesus, he felt like he didn't have any peace in this ministry anymore. And so Jesus has to reinstate him at the end of the Gospel of John. The emotions were in turmoil. The confidence was shot. And you know, in Thomas's case, and also in these guys' case, in the book Gospel of Luke, they didn't want to get their hopes up. You know, and again, this is, you know, the fact that the women were the first ones to discover that the tomb is empty. Again, that's one of those interesting, low-key, flies under the radar type proofs of the validity of the resurrection account. Because back in the day, the word of women didn't mean much. You know, it took, you know, the testimony of two women to equal a guy's testimony. And so, again, if we were to make this up, if the disciples were going to get together and make up the story of Jesus' resurrection, it makes no sense in the world that the first people to encounter the empty tomb would be women. And so, again, that's another one of those fly under radar type evidences of the validity of the story. It makes no sense to write that way in that period of time, but that's the way they kept it because that's what happened. And so the disciples here at this point, they're in a state of doubt. Peter, though, goes to investigate, and he is amazed at what happened. But again, as we've talked about, his brain could not fully make the jump yet, because I'm sure that the women didn't just tell them that the body was missing, but that also they told them what the angels had said about how, you know, again, why are you looking for the living among the dead? And remember what Jesus told you. And so, again, that story is being passed on. And again, Peter he's not able to make that jump yet between what Jesus told him and the fact that this has actually happened. And then we come to the situation that Luke talks about that the other Gospels don't, and that's the encounter with two of Jesus' disciples. You know, not two of the 12, but just two followers of Jesus. Again, you know, you had big D disciples and you had little d disciples. You know, big D disciples were Peter, James, and John. All those guys going through Judas, and these were people that Jesus handpicked out of his crop of disciples in order to become the 12. That would become, again, the foundations of that first century church and the first spreaders of the gospel message. But again, he had many other students. Remember, there was 120 people in the upper room that at the beginning of the book of Acts, you know, that were interacting with each other and also Jesus. So I mean that's your core start of the church at the beginning of Acts is 120, and then it explodes into 3,000 after the day of Pentecost. So these two guys on the road, they're just two of the students of Jesus, and they get to have a conversation with what I call undercover Jesus. In other words, they get to spend time talking to a guy. It's Jesus, but they're not allowed to know it's Jesus yet. It's undercover Jesus. But look at what happens. In verse 13, it says, that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? And he said to them, what things? And they said to him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty indeed in words before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered them up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. Okay, let's stop there. Okay, so again, you have two guys walking to Emmaus discussing the recent events. Again, what else would they be talking about, in all honesty? Okay, but again, they're met by undercover Jesus, who pretends to not know what has happened, and they're kept from recognizing that they're speaking to Jesus. So the two tell them everything they know. Now, here's a sidebar to this. This is also an opportunity to practice telling the gospel story. You remember, if you go to the book of Acts, Jesus didn't pick these guys to be disciples because they were great preachers, because they could put together a lesson and to deliver a sermon. That's not what their role was. Their roles were to be witnesses, to just be able to tell the story of what they had seen and experienced. And you look at the way that Peter spoke on the day of Pentecost, and also afterwards you look at how John would write in his Gospels. They point back to, we had seen these things. That was their mission, to tell what they had seen. And so what two of the followers of Jesus get to do here, they don't know it, but that they get to give sharing of the gospel the dry run, to be able to tell the story. But again, notice what the story of Jesus is without the resurrection, because that's what we get here, is the story of Jesus minus the resurrection. And it's sad. It's a sad story, because they get to the point where he is crucified, but then they say in verse 21, we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, is now the third day since these things have happened, and it moves on. In other words, even though Jesus died, going back to what we discussed at the beginning, to have the crucifixion without the resurrection, okay, yeah, we would have a forgiveness of sins. We would have a way to be able to be intimate with God again. But you wouldn't have the hope. And that's what's missing with these people. Yes, Jesus died, but they still have no hope because Jesus is still gone. There isn't that seeing Jesus again. And so until they see Jesus again, they don't have hope, because compare this to what we will get to here in a little bit, because after they figure out that the person that they're talking to is Jesus. So right now, their hope is dashed, because even though we don't know where Jesus' body is, he's still gone. So they also relate what the women saw, the visions of angels, the missing body. And again, they're still not able to put it all together. The question is, where is the body? Not that Jesus is alive, but where's the body? Now, again, look at undercover Jesus's response to all this. And this is in verse 25. Look at what he says. He says, and he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them and all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Okay, so look at what he says here. First of all, he starts with, "O foolish ones." Can you imagine these guys who, again, they're they're brokenhearted, they're amazed, they're curious. Again, there's a sense of not knowing what is happening here. They just know that Jesus is gone. Jesus is dead. We don't know where he is, and since Jesus is gone, dead, our hope is gone too. And then here's Jesus just telling them, "Oh, foolish ones! Is that the time to call somebody foolish?" Well, Jesus can, but he does so. Why? Because the resurrection should have been obvious. Again, Jesus told them about it numerous times. So the resurrection should have been obvious. He also calls them slow of heart. Why? Because the resurrection should have been obvious. And then he takes them by the hand, so to speak, and leads them, because again, they're walking 7 miles. What else are you going to do? You got no music you can listen to you got no podcast to listen to, you got no cell phones to hook into iHeartRadio or anything like that to be able to listen to. So if you're walking in a group, you're talking. So on this 7-mile walk, he takes them by the hand and takes them back to the Old Testament and breaks down the Old Testament prophecies concerning the Messiah, because that's the third part to his response. It's not just Jesus who told them. It's not just Jesus who told the Jews what was going to happen to Messiah. The prophets have spoken through the Spirit of God. The teachings of the resurrection goes back to the Old Testament. The first prophecy concerning the Messiah is in Genesis chapter 3. So right after the fall of man, God starts dropping these prophecies concerning the Messiah. And then he also says, was it not necessary? So again, being the Messiah means suffering, death, and resurrection. So again, beginning with Moses, he takes them and goes forward with it. And it goes back and he goes back and explains all the prophecies concerning the Messiah. So it's, even though, again, chapter numbers and verse numbers didn't come into God's word until centuries after all this happened, but he's taken them by the hand and taken them to places like Psalm 16, Psalm 22, Psalm 110, Isaiah 53, among other places that point out the path of the Messiah. Because this is the thing, the Jews misunderstood it because of the Jewish messianic expectation. When the Messiah comes, he's going to come in earthly power. He's going to come and lead the nation. He's going to come and kick out the Romans. He's going to come and free Israel, and Israel will never be conquered again. And it's going to be like wealth and power and influence and all this worldly stuff. That's what the Jews were expecting from the Messiah, and Jesus came fulfilling none of that. And so that's why they missed it. But if we look at what the Old Testament tells us, the path of Messiah is going to be, he's going to come, and when his time comes, there's going to be suffering. And when time comes, there's going to be death. But don't worry, because when time comes, there's going to be resurrection. It's in their law. It's in their prophets. But they did not see it. That's how come it's obvious to God, it's obvious to the angels, it's obvious to Jesus, but it was not obvious to the people, because the people still had their Jewish messianic expectation. So let's see what happens next. In verse 28, it says, so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is towards evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened. And they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord has risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Okay, so they break bread together. It's getting late. The two are stopping in Emmaus. Undercover Jesus is going to pretend to go on somewhere else, but they're like, no, stay, it's late. Because I bet they're having a fabulous time. This conversation, just it's just giving them all sorts of hope that they hadn't had since before Jesus was arrested. So again, Jesus is a magnetic personality. You spend time with Jesus, you want to spend more time with Jesus. But you look at what happens there when they go in and they get their meal. Jesus reenacts communion, and then again, it's if you ever experienced a slow reveal in a movie or in a book where you see something and you see the pieces start falling together, particularly in like mystery type shows, Alfred Hitchcock type shows, M. Night Shyamalan type movies, and things like this, where you see these movies with twist endings, but you see these clues start falling in place like dominoes, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. They've experienced this walk with undercover Jesus, and undercover Jesus is opening the scripture to them and showing them all of this. And then we're eating together, and undercover Jesus reenacts communion. And then all of a sudden the veil falls from undercover Jesus' face, and finally they're able to recognize him, and they recognize him, and boom, he's gone. And then it's like this eureka moment. They realize what it is that they've seen. Finally, they recognize that Jesus did indeed raise from the dead, and they're not going to just sit there with this news. They're going to walk the 7 miles back to Jerusalem. I'm sure there was running involved, and tell the others what they had seen. And so while they're there, they also find out that the Lord had also appeared to Simon. Luke doesn't go into that, but it's put in here. Somewhere along the way, the Lord appeared to Simon. And then they're told what's happened on the road. And so now people are starting to see and understand, yes, Jesus was raised from the dead. And so now what we're going to start seeing, hope, confidence, assurance that again they lost after Jesus was arrested. But again, as we talked about a lot today, it's the obviousness of the resurrection. Again, the path of the Messiah was laid back in Genesis 3, where God told the serpent, you're going to strike his heel, but he's going to crush your head. That there was going to be a pain, that there was going to be a seeming defeat. There's going to be a little bit of a victory for the snake, so to speak, but it's not going to be long lasting because he's going to strike the snake's head. And it was made clearer as time again goes on. We talked about some verses earlier, Psalm 16, where it talks about how you will not let your Holy One see decay. There was going to be a death, but the death wasn't going to last long. The decay wasn't going to be allowed to set into the body of the dead one. We talked about Psalm 22. If you've never read Psalm 22, I encourage you to do so, because it's a picture of the crucifixion. It starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it just goes on through there. And it talks about crucifixion in a time when crucifixion didn't exist. They pierced my hands and my feet. It talks about how there was going to be gambling for the clothes of Jesus. And again, all these little bits that are involved with the crucifixion is discussed in Psalm 22. You can talk about Psalm 110, which points to the fact that talking about the Son of God, it's a royal psalm. We could talk about Isaiah 53, which again is a long prophecy concerning the death and resurrection of the Messiah. So again, it's there. This is what the Messiah was. As we talked about earlier, the Jews were able to come about with their own expectations of what the Messiah was going to be. And this is why, as if you've hung out with me throughout this entire study of Luke, this is why the Jews were so frustrated with Jesus, because on one side you have what the Old Testament says the Messiah is going to be, but over here you have what the Jewish traditions say the Messiah is going to be. And they did not intersect on any point. They were completely different. But Jesus fulfilled what the Old Testament said what the Messiah was going to be, not what the Jewish tradition said the Messiah was going to be. And so that's how come there was all this confusion. This is how come the obviousness of the resurrection was lost on the disciples and the women and all the humans that were involved in this. They had a hard time catching on because, one, it was too good to be true. And again, two, the traditions of men watered down the prophecies. And since the traditions of men watered down the prophecies, they were not looked, the third day approaching was not seen as any day special. It was seen like any other day. Because if they understood what was going to happen, if the traditions of men had not watered down the prophecies, on that third day, you can only imagine all the people who were disciples of Jesus would have been outside that tomb waiting for him to come out. But they didn't, because they lost the obviousness of the resurrection. The resurrection did happen. Again, the death of Jesus was the most important event in human history, but it's the resurrection that gives us hope and confidence to be able to continue on. Grace and peace to you all. We'll wrap up Luke next week. Thank you.